Good day, everyone. My name is Jaco Kruger. I am a tax practitioner that specializes around assisting taxpayers with impaired and disabled individuals to claim their medical and disability expenses from their tax returns and to create a tax cash credit on the tax returns. And in most cases, it results in a tax refund for the people. Today's presentation in terms of content will be introduction. I just want to sort of give a bit of background around where I come from, the reason why I do what I do. And then we'll talk about some very important notes and requirements in terms of this claiming process. I'll briefly go through the RTRDD form, which is the confirmation form required and to confirm the diagnosis. We'll go through the SARS guidelines in its totality and then also explain our process from our side. How do we do this whole thing? And then leave you with our contact details. At this point, I just want to mention that although we're going to go through some of the SARS information and share that information, it is just a broad framework, and that the details happens at our pre-consultation that we offer, where we actually, in my words, we actually marry the law and theory with the practical disability environment of the particular person involved, the taxpayer involved. That's where it really happens, where we get all the details and ensure they claim correctly. So this is just a broad sort of spectrum around what's possibly can claim and not claimable. All right. First of all, on the introduction side is I am a parent of an adult individual and son, a special needs son that was diagnosed when he was 8 years old, now 32, with being autistic and ADHD. Which is quite a long road we traveled with him, and getting him to sort of heal from his tactile dysfunction and hyperactivity, all those sort of stuff that we had during his teen years was quite a challenge for us. A lot of financial implications, as you would know. And but now he's living with us permanently, and his tactile dysfunction and his hyperactivity, those effects are all gone out through great therapy around an occupational therapist. And that's why I decided to start this business a couple of years ago, or 8 years actually ago, because we need to help people to claim these rightful expenses, because it's very expensive, not even to talk about the emotional distress we go through. So our business is family driven. It's an invested interest due to our personal experience in our business. And our objective is then really to give financial relief to taxpayers, not just to improve, but to maintain the quality of that individual, because in permanent disability, the cost of there to stay. And so hence we need to claim it every year correctly and help them to maintain their quality of life. Some important notes to take care of is, first of all, we're claiming our expense from a taxpayer. In other words, you know, if there's medical aid benefits that we need to claim from the husband, then if that person pays for it from their salary or from their bank account, it can only be claimed from that person, and vice versa from the spouse in terms of expenses. And it can only be claimed from a taxpayer. In other words, a person that does pay taxes. Where there is no tax involved, there's normally not a refundable position. However, we do have certain individuals that are provisional taxpayers, where they have outside income as professional people, and then we claim those expenses against that to reduce their tax liability, because we're claiming the rightful expenses. Then the list of qualifying expenses signed off by the Commission is there on the SARS website, but the rule has always been, from SARS point of view, that we follow consequence of disability. Well, for any cost, it's got to be consequence of disability and not paid by your medical aid. So in other words, anything that was paid by your medical aid cannot be claimed. I do know that in some cases they pay for a pro rata of the expenses, so we need to do a bit of a calculation there to claim only the portion that wasn't paid by the medical aid. Yeah, and as we said, we'll incur the cost, so we claim from the person that paid for the expenses, but in some cases we do have parents with combined accounts. It's most important there that both people come on board, because we need to ensure to SARS that wherever we're claiming these expenses from is not duplicated on the other taxpayer. The RTRDD form, that's the form we spoke earlier on about. That's the form that SARS requires for you to confirm the diagnosis of a person with disability. Prior to 1 March 2020, when you did the form, it will be valid for 5 years. but then after the 1st of March 2020, that form is now valid for 10 years. There is a new form on the SARS website, which is a little bit different on their page 5, but we're still seeking exact clarity as to how that form must be completed. So we're using the old standard form, which you can also acquire from us if you're not too sure. But that form is now valid for 10 years before you have to renew that form. That RTODD form has also got a component on called the date of diagnosis, which is the date the person was diagnosed with a disability. That will always determine the start point from when we can claim these expenses. And the SARS does allow us to recover up to 3 years tax years, of costs and expenses. And as I mentioned, if that date of the diagnosis on the form actually does state that. The RTODD form has got 6 pages. It needs to be completed and signed off by appropriate medical specialist, not a general practitioner. And it's got a, like I said, got a 6-page document. That form is very important as the completeness of that form is very valid for SARS. I do look at that form quite strictly, so we need to ensure that form is always 100% completed on the 6 pages. The calculation of the benefit on a taxpayer's tax return is basically, I call it a medical disability cash credit on the tax return. Do remember that when I explain this formula in a minute, that this is the gets added to the taxpayer's actual other benefits. So if you have travel allowance or donations that you deduct, that you normally get every year a benefit from, this cash credit will be added to that refund to increase your tax refund. But if you don't have any other benefits, never claimed before, and there's no other benefits, then this refund on this calculation I'll mention in a second will then become your tax refund. Now the calculation is purely 33.3% or a third of the following 3 elements added together. I say a portion of your medical aid contributions, because what SARS does in their calculations per law, they take the total medical aid contributions and subtract a medical credit as such. And that's determined on the number of members on that medical aid. So I say a portion of the medical aid contributions, then plus number 2, your disability expenses or costs. Now those are the medical and disability expenses directly related to the person with disability, only that area. Number 3 would be out-of-pocket medical expenses. That could be medical expenses by other members of that family that, again, wasn't paid by the medical aid. And what SARS does is they add all these 3 components to them, arrive at an answer times 33.3% and credit your tax return on a cash number, whatever that answer is. In the law terms, it's called additional medical tax credit or AMTC. And that's normally on your last line item on your page 4 of your IGA 34, which is your result document. On the ITRDD side, it's got 6 pages, very self-explanatory. And as I said, this form can be found on our website or on the SARS website. You can even mail us and ask us for a copy of that for us to check it for you, because it's a very important form and it's going to be done correctly. But just to run through it very briefly, page 1 is the page that must be completed by the person that was diagnosed for the disability, the actual person with disability. Then page 2 is the actual person claiming the disability, and that's the taxpayer. So where husband and wife, for example, although they might be the person with disability themselves or have dependents, they must fill in each of those, must fill in the page 2 because they're different taxpayers. In a case where the taxpayer is also the person with disability, not a dependent, then they will complete page 1 and just date and sign page 2 as the taxpayer also, because that's one and the same person. You don't have to complete the entire page 2 again. Now, page 3 and 4 is where the areas of disability are indicated, like visual, communication, etc. And the year and month of diagnosis are disclosed on it. That's the date that confirms when that disability was diagnosed. And as I mentioned earlier on, that's the date from where you can start claiming your expenses, etc. Page 5 is normally the page where the medical specialist will actually indicate what level or degree of disability is. In terms of mild or moderate to severe are the 2 options. Mild is purely on a temporary basis and is more for physical impairment. The calculation is vastly different in terms of the benefit on your tax return. It's not the 33.3%. Whereas on the moderate to severe side, which indicates a permanent disability, that's 33.3% in the calculator. There's a big difference between the 2, and that person, the medical person, will normally stamp that page 5 in practice, and complete that and sign that for us as well. Page 6 is where the particulars of your medical practitioner or specialist is completed, and that normally also sometimes attracts a stamp on it, and that's the 6 pages that you can submit every year to SARS on top of all your schedule of expenses that you want to claim from the South African Revenue Service. Right, then some of the guidelines, you can revert to SARS guidelines, guide on their website, and for exactly how this thing is calculated, like I mentioned before, and what can be claimed. But I just want to run through sort of the basics of it. And again, as I said early on, that the details of these things are being discussed at our pre-consultation. But just in terms of the broad spectrum of it, we have 6 areas defined by SARS, which is your hearing, vision, physical, intellectual, speech, and mental. And within those 6 areas, you have 9 defined categories, which makes up your list of qualifying expenses approved by our SARS Commissioner. The first one I want to talk about is primary care. Now, this primary care is nurses and trained attendants for adult people with disabilities and for dependents. And that will include typically costs like your salary cost, training, living in cost, no transport, however, but also like agencies that provide such service, their cost. And any training, as I said, that this person incurs to have them ready to perform such a service will be calculated. And if a person stays in with you, I think it's since 2022, there's now 20% add-on for the stay-in costs. But obviously there's some documentation that you've got to substantiate that with, but that's for living in, if a care attendant stays in with you. It does exclude living costs of a person with disability, like in our case, for example, we have our son that stays in with us, and his expenses are not allowed by SARS, and also family members are also not allowed in terms of the primary care. Then travel and other related expenses. There's a couple of components here. One being travel to and from special or remedial nature schools, and that is any return kilometer for that matter, in excess of 10. So when your child is more than 10 kilometers from your home, you can do a logbook with certain documentation and claim those expenses on transport. But it also does involve transport for your other service providers, like your therapies, doctor's appointments, all those return kilometers can also be indicated on the logbook and can also be claimed that way. It does also provide for transport where you have a service provider. We do have some around in South Africa that actually drive these disabled persons to and from their destination, and most times it's schooling. And you can also claim those again. Make sure that it's at about 10 kilometers from home. Then the third item would be reasonable travel and accommodation. That is when you have for example, you fly over to Cape Town from Gauteng, for example, to see a medical specialist. All your accommodation, flight costs, even caretaker along the way if needed, can be claimed. Your cost at the residential area where you stay, the accommodation, but not your food and beverage. That is excluded from the list. Those things you can then claim as well. Then aids and other devices, those are typically examples such as hearing aids, wheelchairs, crutches, any assistive device that you have to assist you during your daily routine. And that will include also educational material for children that make use of this educational material. And I sometimes also include in here an option on special vitamins if applicable. But again, when it comes to those items, you must support that by way of a professional letter from your medical specialist to assist with those. Then the next one, I want to jump to insurance, maintenance, repairs, and supplies. That is in line with your aids and devices. So that is purely basically just maintaining and any repairs on your devices that you have to do. And those two go hand in one together. If you want to insure anything like wheelchairs or hearing aids, nowadays SARS are asking us to specify those on our policies, and that premium can then be claimed for a particular tax year. Our service providers is again excluding your schools that we spoke about, your therapists, drivers, service doctors, pharmacies, rehab, all the kind of people that provide a service to the person with impairment or disability. And again, please remember those are not paid by Medicare. Those are the ones you would be claiming, and those are the ones I mentioned you can add to your transport when you travel, and you use your private vehicle to take somebody there and back. Then modifications of assets. Those are more for the physical impaired individuals, and that includes modifications to your primary residence, both internal and external. And the reason for that is you improve accessibility for individual in and outside the house, which can include things like alarm systems, security gates, pools, excuse me, accessibility is in and around the house, railings, those kind of things. It also includes modifications to vehicles, like hand controls, etc. Any modifications you make to a vehicle, even if you purchase a vehicle already modified from overseas, there's expenses you can claim on that one as well. Then also confidence products, that is also for physically impaired people in general, and those include nappies, diapers, catheters, special vitamins. Oh, yes, a special supplement under this section. Okay. So yeah, we include all those in there, and again, not paid by medical aid. Your service animals is any cost directly related to the service animal. That includes maintenance, even insurance of the actual service animal. Prosthetics, that's just aids and limbs, for limbs, sorry, that you purchase for the person with disability. Then our process, second last, we have got our pre-consultation, as I mentioned earlier on, and there we have an interaction with the potential client or taxpayer, and we then align the SARS guidelines with the disability environment, and that's where we go through all the details of that person's daily routine, what expenses can be claimed, what wasn't paid by medical aid, as I said, and we in that process then determine to what extent can we assist the person. And do note that when you take over a particular taxpayer's tax return to make these deductions and claim rightfully, we take the entire tax return over, because your tax return, as you know, consists of income and expenses. So we do the entire tax return on behalf of the taxpayer. So once the client comes over, we start to send out a list of specific documentation, and presentation of those documents are vital from our side. So we ensure that the right documentation is submitted to us. We compile a claim again in a very specific order, and certain documentation is very crucial. No modification of documents from the source is allowed. What I mean by that is, if you have bank statements, a CSV file is not accepted because that can be manipulated. So we need a copy of the bank statements, for example. And in this complaint, we ensure at the end of the day, before we submit, that our petition is 100% correct. And we also sometimes also confer with our clients if we have everything first, especially first-time clients, and then we submit being 100% correct on the first submission. On the submission to SARS, we will then give the full results to the clients, to the taxpayers, and just show them what are their benefits on that 33.3%, and also just the entire tax return results, the remittance, and we call that an IGA 34. And then there's normally, in terms of audits, there's a 21 working day turnaround time for SARS, and once they finish and they're happy with the audit, they will issue a completion letter, and then we advise clients that the audit is finished, and obviously if there's a refundable amount, that will then be paid to the client. So that whole process and feedback happens as we get information from SARS. We get notified first, and we will then inform our clients on an ad hoc basis when we have communication from SARS. All right, that's all from my side. Our contact details is info@disabilitytax.co.za. That is to make your request for your pre-consultation, to make an informative decision afterwards. And always I say, please give us some dates and times that you're available. Sometimes there is a husband and wife would like to be present because they share the cost and the responsibilities. Then can't be both present when we have that telephonic conversation. We do telephonics most of the time because the Zoom and all those other options sometimes have delays in connectivity, which just give a bit of a problem. So to make it efficient, it's a telephonic conversation between us and the clients at the moment. If you want anything to know more about this, or my contact, is also our website, which is www.disabilitytax.co.za. Thank you very much.